Thank you. By the way, nature is inherently resilient and adaptive, right? So I think plants and trees make perfect sense, right? Maybe we should think about learning from the natural systems, and thinking when we're thinking about the design criteria, right? So, anyways, that was a great presentation. So with that, I'm going to talk about something very different. I'm going to talk about a specific case study, and then I think it was Tim from WEC. He briefly alluded to this event. So I'm going to talk about the polar vortex event in the Northwest in January 2024. And this was a study that was, we were just doing the study, looking at doing empirical analysis of what happened during the event. And this was work funded by the Water Power Technologies Office at the DOE. So it was a more hydro-specific study. But then the results that came out is like, and the bottom line up front is we've got to think about this as a system as a whole, and the role of every single, and each element has a specific role to play. So understanding what that specific element does, right, and thinking about how do we during operations, but also during planning stages, how do we appropriately account for each of these and their salient characteristics, right? So the polar vortex, just a quick background. This is happened in January and was from January 11th to January 18th. And the figure on the top right, it shows, the temperatures dropping, like in some cases, 40, 50 degrees below normal, right? And so that created severe, the load, the load was extremely severe during those times, right? We can see again, the load itself was 40-50% above what's normal during that period. But there were other things that were happening concurrently. This just happens to be a below average water year. There was, the snowpack issues and runoff issues. So that exacerbated the impact of the extreme event. And then what we also see concurrently happening during these kinds of events is there's reduction in wind output, especially during extremely cold temperatures, right? And then it can also impact gas supply, which can create additional generation shortfall issues. So there's a very local, there's a very short-term resource adequacy kinds of issues that start creeping up because of under these extreme events, and we've got to take a look at this at this thing in a holistic manner. Look at all of the different factors that are leading to creation of these scarcity events, or that happens during these scarcity events. So with that, because this was a hydro-focused study, let me talk briefly about what the hydro system was doing. This is, and I'm talking brief, I'm very focused on the Northwest hydro system, right? So the figure on the bottom right, it shows what the hydro fleet was doing at the during the cold event, the polar vortex. We see a tremendous increase in the generation from all of the hydropower resources in the Northwest, and that's a testament to the flexibility and the long-term storage potential with hydro. By the way, hydro still happens to be the cleanest source of long duration energy storage. We can think of cold stacks and gas as other sources of long duration energy storage. But the question always is, like, what happens when these resources go away as we're trying to reach our decarbonization goals, right? So, but if I just show you that, that's going to be incomplete and mischaracterizing, right, what happened during the event. That was just the hydro fleet responding to that event, but there was a lot of work that happened in preparing the hydro fleet to get to a point where it could respond, especially considering this was a less than average water year. So there was already reduced generation, as you can see. Actually, there's probably in the next slide. There was reduced generation from the hydro fleet because of the less than average water year, right? And by the way, if you look at the top right, prices in the system that typically hover around $20 to $40 a megawatt hour started going 1,000 megawatts. Energy prices in the energy imbalance market started going reaching $2,000 a megawatt hour. In fact, California ISO had to relax its scarcity pricing from 1,000 megawatts to 2,000 megawatts to get additional resources available, right? So and the other resources were just as important, right? So the figure, like the figure that's just showing up, it's showing what the natural gas resources were doing during the event. We see that's the range. The shaded area is the range from 2017, for the past 6 years. But then the dark line is what the actual generation was from natural gas fleet. So the natural gas generation was at its basically it's at its record levels before, during, and after the event. The wind generation, it is what it is, right? But we're seeing what happened before, and this is really a contrast of before and after, or before, during, and after. Before, right, we are seeing wind generation again reaching some of its record levels at 5,000 megawatts in the Northwest, but then dropping almost down to zero. So it's a bit of a double whammy, right? You got low water, no wind, and then also starting to see some disruptions in the natural gas generation because of the supply issues. And then this is what the hydro fleet was doing at the time, right? Before and after, they were basically dropped, they were at their almost minimum, like record minimum generation levels, right? And this is a function of low water, but also some proactive planning because of in anticipation of the event, and so that basically the reservoirs are up to their maximum capacities to be able to respond during the event itself. And finally, what we see is the interchange, right? The role of transmission and the interchange, and this is if you see at the figure on the right, it's north to south. That's how you should read it. So when it's negative, there's more generation. There's generation there's imports happening from south to north, right? From California and other places into the Northwest, which is typically the opposite, right? In most times of the year. So all of these things helped in combination for the system to be able to ride through this event, right? So yes, so hydro fleet is important, and it provides a lot of flexibility, a lot of storage, but then it requires a systems level thinking to get the hydro fleet to be in position to be able to respond. And that's basically what was happening. And now this is crossing just institutional boundaries, jurisdictions. So it's not just an institution by itself capable of doing this by itself, but it requires systems level thinking across the entire interchange, in this case, the entire Western interconnection. We've got some quotes in there, which you can see. It shows you how much basically BPA was buying and record level imports from during this event. Interest of time, I'll skip this. Basically, every single bit helped. They used not just the day ahead markets through the mid-sea and the ICE, the exchange, but then there was also additional buying opportunities presented through lower prices during certain times of the day, which again the BPA and others availed, and every opportunity to basically fill up the reservoirs was being availed through all the different means, all the different instruments that they had available, right? So if I were to summarize, like, this is basically like just what Ali's right. We got to think about these things from 10 years. What's going to happen 10 years, and start planning for it right now. Planning for those things, right? But some of those events are starting to happen right now, and events are happening with more frequency. But at times when we have not seen those with intensity that we have not seen before, right? So this is presenting a window into the future, and we can think about how we're responding now versus how we should be responding, and how we should be thinking about the design criteria as we go forward. So in conclusion, right? So the flexibility and storage of hydro was important, but it required the entire village, right? Entire systems level thinking that we don't typically think of. to help prepare the hydro system to respond in this manner. Transmission played a major role, but then you can ask questions of, hey, what if this wasn't available? And there was an instance actually during the event when the DC inner tie was not was out of commission for a certain period of time, right? And then the other thing, we rely extensively on our conventional fuel sources to be able to provide that resource adequacy, both long-term and short-term. So what happens when these resources go away? And then also that the whole thing of spiel about the systems level thinking, which is going beyond institutional boundaries and jurisdictions. And so how do we think about that in a more extensive, holistic manner? And by the way, Kostas is going to talk about some work we're doing, which is taking a further out look, 10-15. So I think this presentation, I think that sets a good sort of context for Kostas's presentation as well.